The Great Tribulation is that period of time that lasts 7 years. It will take place after the rapture, and we're going to deal with the rapture and why we know it's pre-tribulation in a couple of weeks. And this 7-year period of time is the last 7 years before Jesus Christ returns to the earth. At the rapture, He doesn't return to the earth. He calls out the saints and they meet Him in the air. But at the end of the tribulation, He actually lands, the Bible says, where? Mount of Olives. That's where He went up. Acts chapter 1. They said He'll come back just as He went up. And if you doubt that they're being literal about Him coming back to Mount of Olives, the Old Testament tells you. Zechariah chapter 12. It's going to be right there at the Mount of Olives. So the rapture is before the tribulation. The second coming ends the tribulation. That's how you can remember the differences. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at just some chapters, not whole chapters, but several verses in each chapter that tell us what this Great Tribulation period is. And starting here in Isaiah chapter 2, we are going to read this whole chapter. And it says, beginning verse 1, the word that Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills. And look at this, all nations shall flow unto it. Now this is talking about the millennium. We talked about that last week, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Verse 3, and many people shall go and say, come ye and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And He will teach us of His ways, and we will walk in His paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Now, during the millennium, there's going to be a whole different setup than what we have today. And we'll talk about that at another time. But now He steps back and He tells us what's going to set up this age, this millennium, that He just told us about. He says in verse 4, and He shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. That's on the United Nations building. What they leave out is the first half of the verse and verse 5. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. So, what's going to set this whole thing up is this time of tribulation, which is what He's doing in the tribulation period. He's judging the nations. Verse 6, therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they replenished from the east and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves and the children of strangers. Their land also is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end of their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, neither is there any end of their chariots. So Israel was prosperous, but they didn't appreciate God, and He threw them off. He says in verse 8, their land also is full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. And the mean man boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself. Therefore forgive them not. They were involved in idol worship. Verse 10, enter into the rock, and hide thee in the dust for fear of the Lord, and for the glory of His majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Now we're moving into what He tells us about the tribulation period. For the day of the Lord of hosts. Whenever you read the Bible, it talks about the day of the Lord. It's talking about this day of tribulation. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan. It's no accident. Lebanon is still in the news today. That's who that war was with last summer, Israel versus Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this is like reading yesterday's newspaper. Verse 14, and upon all the high mountains and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all pleasant pictures, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. And the idols he shall utterly abolish. By the way, that would refer to Buddha. That would refer to Mary, the false Mary that's being worshipped around the world. There's all kinds of idols, literal idols people are praying to. In the Hindu religion, there's millions of little gods and goddesses. And so it's literally taking place today, and after the Christians are removed, the type of Christianity that's left behind are worshiping icons in the Orthodox Church, Mary and the saints in the Roman Catholic Church, and the Protestants are all getting swept up in that today. You can go to Protestant conferences on Mary and icons. It's all becoming, standard worship in every religion today. The whole New Age movement. They're into idols, they're into speaking, trying to contact angels. And they have the little angel idols that they use for visualization, they call it. Idol worship, that's all it is. In verse 19, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth for the fear of the Lord and for the glory of His majesty when He ariseth, and there's a key phrase, to shake terribly the earth. That probably describes the period of Great Tribulation better than any phrase in the Bible. To shake terribly the earth. Verse 20, in that day a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats. Why? Because they're useless, and it'll be so obvious that these little idols they've been worshiping don't do them any good. They'll just throw them to the bats. And verse 21, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the ragged rocks for the fear of the Lord and for the glory of His majesty, again, when He ariseth to shake terribly the earth. That, again, is the Great Tribulation, the day of the Lord. When you see one phrase, it's talking about the other. Now, the day of the Lord begins with the rapture. And then it carries on through the Great Tribulation period to the end when Jesus returns with us following and the angels, and He will then wipe out the world system at the end of the tribulation period and establish His kingdom on the earth. All that is the day of the Lord. And it's also known as the Great Tribulation period. I want you to look at just a few pages over in Daniel chapter 12. He talks about the Great Tribulation to some great extent. Chapter 11 is especially important. In chapter 12, he says in verse 1, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of my people. That's a reference to Israel. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. This is another phrase that you'll see about the Great Tribulation period. It's called a time of trouble. Revelation 3:10, we're not going to look at it right now, but Revelation 3:10 is a promise to the Church of Philadelphia that He'll keep you from the hour of trial. That's the tribulation that's to come on the whole earth. And this is a all-encompassing event. And we're not going to talk about it in depth this week, but we're going to talk about when we talk about the rapture, how that the church is not there. And the reason the church isn't in the tribulation period isn't because we believe God would never allow us to be persecuted. That's the false charge made towards people who are pre-trib